right, welcome back, Cameron. We are now shifting our gaze from here to out there. Commodity prices, the global economy. If you were to describe the global economy at the moment, how would you describe it?
Full of hope. And we certainly hope that a vaccine turns up. We hope we don't see more political shenanigans, but then you've got a little bit of economic reality. And if you look at what the International Monetary Fund is talking about, the OECD, all these organisations, Federal Reserve governors, it's pretty clearly that the risk profile is skewed lower. But for now, we're in that hope mode.
Is it Great Depression, 1930s kind of thing? Is it worse or simply different?
It's different, and I don't think comparisons, it's a little bit like comparing an apple with an orange. So if we ever look at the GDP hit New Zealand and the global economy is taking around the June quarter, which is just passed, you're going to see probably quarterly GDP contracting 15 to 20%. We got absolutely slotted as we went into lockdown mode. But of course the bungee cord has been attached. So we're probably going to see a 15% bounce back in the September quarter. And we're seeing these big recoveries, springboard effect coming through. But technically, it is the deepest downturn we've seen in New Zealand's economic history. But if I think about the Great Depression, the thing about the Great Depression, which marks it as the Great Depression, was it wasn't 1 quarter, 2 quarter, or 3 quarters of being stuck in a hole. It was 3 years. Year after year after year, the economy contracted. Now, what we're seeing at the moment in New Zealand and globally is that we've bounced back up. Of course, for some parts, some countries around the globe, you've had that bounce, the likes of America and Australia, and then lo and behold, the damn things come back and you're going back into lockdown mode again. And if people want to sort of appreciate what could be going on in the likes of California or Melbourne, go talk to any New Zealander and ask them how they would feel if we went back to alert level 2 or 3. I don't think you get a good response.
No, although to be fair, we should probably all be preparing for that, I imagine. I'm reassessing how many cans of peaches and beans I've got. Everyone's focused on COVID, but is there a lot more going on at this point in time? It's here and it's happening, but there's also all of the other things that are going on.
There is, We've had the overlap between the economic side of the ledger versus the social side, and people are starting to push back. Housing affordability, income inequality are global issues. Obviously the environment is was the issue of the day. I suspect the issue of the day is now going to be jobs. Am I going to have one? There's something like 50 million Americans have lost their jobs. Those are absolutely eye-watering numbers out the other side. And the global economy has got a big repair job. Now central banks, governments are out there, they're firing off bazookas to help us out, but you start to wonder about what are going to be some of the behavioural shifts that could happen out of this on the other side. Obviously some things such as online shopping, it's going to get turbocharged. Working from home, well, that's going to become a reality, particularly if you're in Auckland and you don't want to spend excessive amount of time on the motorway. Probably the same thing down in Wellington. But you start to think about what are people's appetites going to be to spend versus save? Because this is a pretty big shock. And it's reminded a lot of people that, maybe we need to have a little bit more of that precautionary savings buffer.
So we could well see some good things coming out of a global COVID-based downturn.
Yeah, I think there will. You certainly hope so. There's got to be a little bit of glass half full on the other side. One of the big ones that you're looking at as well, the global economy is tremendously unbalanced. If you look at countries such as Germany, Japan, even China, they invest too much and they don't spend enough. We've got to encourage those economies, regions to get out there and learn to be a little bit more like Kiwis and spend the money. The Americans are, they're the reverse. They like to spend, not to save. And the global economy is very lopsided, very unbalanced. Now, one of the big things that could be great for New Zealand is if we start to see China embark on a more economic reform, because their model at the moment is tremendously investment dominated. Investment's in excess of 40% of GDP. Your consumption is below 40% of GDP. That's spending on items. Now, if you look at a typical Western economy, a typical Western economy, spending is around 60 to 70% of GDP. We love to get out there and blow all the loot. Part of rebalancing is creating that Chinese consumer, and guess what they could want going forward. In fact, we're still seeing it within commodity prices. It's been amazing to see how resilient, robust commodity prices have been over the past 6 months relative to the global scene. There's actually been a really good story there in a relative sense, because yes, they have come down, but relative to what's happened across the global economy, we've done remarkably well.
And we've certainly seen China flexing its muscles. We're looking at not only their spending, but there's also now very strong geopolitical situations developing. We've seen them telling Australia to butt out of various things. Hong Kong is a global flashpoint. Any of that we should be taking care of down in this part of the world and thinking about? Is there an opportunity?
Opportunities. But if I sit back and think about, probably the big geopolitical point around the globe that New Zealand needs to be mindful of is what's going on in regard to globalisation. Now, globalisation is just a fancy word for the world getting more connected. So what did we see in the 30 years in the lead up to the global financial crisis? Global trade as a share of GDP was rising. Now, New Zealand's a trading nation, so we like that environment. What have we seen pre-COVID? Last year you had China and Donald Trump sort of squaring off. Free trade versus fair trade. And all of a sudden we're starting to see barriers that are starting to get put up. What's going on with COVID as well is that people are starting to think about, pharmaceuticals, healthcare items. Do I really want to be reliant upon China, India for this? So all of a sudden it looks like pharmaceuticals are going to be domestic based as opposed to offshore produced. But a lot more goods are going to get produced domestically. The concern for New Zealand, and the one we're going to keep an eye on, is what does globalisation mean for, if it starts to unwind, demand for food?
Indeed, and if you're looking at that kind of, that globalisation of manufacturing, they saw all of those things stutter to a halt, where suddenly they're saying we can't have this particular product out because we can't source the parts from here. England, I suspect, will see it with Brexit when suddenly they can't get all of those bits and pieces in across the channel. How quickly we forget about something like Brexit, with the COVID scenario going on?
Middle East.
The Middle.
We could go through. There's a whole lot of.
Quite happy to be sitting on my plywood bench on a delightful Pacific island.
Yeah, but if you ever look at what have we seen in regard to COVID? We've seen food producing plants around the globe in America and Germany have completely shut down. Which is creating. You wouldn't want to stand in front of it. Not have that piece of steak or big piece of pork in front of the average American, because they tend to like the stuff. Now that's creating opportunity for New Zealand, because economics 101 is the world still needs to eat. But then you start to think about what are things going to look like down the track as countries start to think about security of their food supply chain. So we're seeing countries now such as Singapore that was basically 100% reliant upon the global food chain to supply themselves. They're now starting to talk about being 30% domestic based and 70% import based. Now those are pretty big tectonic shifts in regard to what they mean for global food trade.
What does it mean for us?
Well, glass half full, and there's potentially a glass half empty, because what could take place here, it could accelerate the move towards lab-grown meat.
I was going to say, and there's been a lot of discussion around food sovereignty and various other things in respect to that. If you were a producer of beef or lamb or meat or produce from down here, would you be concerned? Are you concerned? Do you think it's a roadblock ahead of us at some point in the near future? Well,
there's always these sort of concerns, but you can be glass half full or glass half empty. I've been that eternal Highlanders supporter, so I tend to be a little bit more glass half full in regard to how I think things are going to unfold here on the other side. But we need to acknowledge the risks, and there are those risks. But there's opportunities. Like, you think about what New Zealand has been presented with here in regard to whether it be Sanctuary New Zealand, Brand New Zealand, in regard to putting differentiated produce on the global stage. Because we've got a marketing opportunity here I don't think we've ever seen in New Zealand's lifetime. The issue here, how do we unlock this and really move forward and sort of strike while the iron is hot? Because I don't think it's going to be hot for too long.
No, indeed. What's an example that you would have seen of best practice? from New Zealand, something we've gone, boy, that's exactly what we should be doing?
I want to say best practice, but we're seeing a whole lot of examples. Yeah, you have a look at the kiwi fruit industry in regard to the prices they've been extracting. Have a look at the new varieties of apples, the premiums that they're extracting versus the old varieties. So we are seeing these isolated cases where New Zealand is moving up the value-added chain. Look at A2 milk. You look at some of the opportunities that we could see here. Synlay's another classic example. But if you actually have a look at where New Zealand, we're still first and foremost a primary-based producer. Now, to be fair, in the current instance, that's probably not a bad place to be, because what we are seeing around the globe at the moment is that discretionary spend comes under pressure. People are paring back their expenditure on discretionary items. And the real risk here is that we start to chase going back down the commodity production line as opposed to the value-added line. So I hope we dig in for the long term.
Because there has been for quite a while that argument that we should be chasing that very high value dollar, the top price in all of those markets. But if that does start to come back, then what happens to our commodity prices? I guess they just...
Yeah, and we're starting to see that fragmentation within the market at the moment. Yeah, but the commodity stuff, if you look at what we're seeing across dairy prices, last week's auction was an absolute stonker. Yeah, by Christ, was that a good number? But we're starting to see fragmented pricing within particular the red meats. So we're going to see a little bit more of that going forward. But the markets will come back. And let's not forget that, look, mathematically, New Zealand can feed 40 to 50 million people. Right? You think about what the global population is today, it's about, I think about, it's either 7.5 or 7.7. It's projected to go to 9.9 billion. That's a big market, and despite I know we're going to push more for technology, lab-grown meat. Now that's got to be complementary to what I call the real deal.
Absolutely. Look, there are a lot of things that I don't understand about economics, and I did scholarship economics, admittedly very poorly. Wasn't very good. But one of the things that you do learn is the difference between a need and a want. This is not the question. That was just me remembering the first thing I learnt in third form economics, which remains the only thing I can recall from economics. There are lots of things I don't understand around recoveries. The alphabet riddles that economists use, V, U, L, Ws, the swooshes, the Ks. What does that all mean for someone who wants to understand economists talking about the economy and the future of the economy?
They just really personify how quickly we're going back to normal. So the V basically says we're back into normal activity pretty damn quick. Yeah, that's the hope. I don't think it's the reality.
No, well, we've always got a hope, so much hope. If you were a farmer now, what would you be doing?
I'd be putting a risk management framework around it, particularly in regard to thinking about commodity prices. Now, I can't provide financial advice, but I can give people a bit of a framework to think about it. Yeah, if I have a look at where the risk profile is for the global economy, I don't think it's up. Now, overlay that, because normally the global economy leads commodity prices. We're seeing a little bit of unique factors at the moment where we're seeing a little bit of a disconnect, but I think ultimately they will reconnect. Yeah, if I was a farmer at the moment and I didn't have too much debt, I'd probably be prepared to take a little bit of risk. Whereas if I was a highly indebted farmer in some discussions with the bank and I'd seen dairy prices pop up of late and they were going to insulate my income statement for the next 12 months, I'd probably think about a bird in the hand looks pretty damn good.
Indeed. Look, we're obsessed with the US dollar. What's happening there?
Well, US dollar started to come under a bit of pressure, and of course currencies are two-sided coins. So when the US dollar goes down, the good old Kiwi dollar goes up. Now, part of the reason the Kiwi dollar is up is because commodity prices have looked a little bit better. So we've got behind us what's called a little bit of the so-called economic fundamentals. The US dollar is still the world's reserve currency. I don't think they're being challenged in the near term. But if you look at some of the economic foundations behind the US dollar, they're quite frightening. The United States has got net external debt. This is liabilities that they owe around the globe of close to $12 trillion. Now, that's a big number. Government debt is around 100% of GDP. Interest rates at the moment are incredibly low, but you start to ask at some stage, are people going to start to demand a little bit more of a risk premium for financing the US economy that likes to spend as opposed to save. So we've got some pundits out there at the moment that are saying the US dollar is on borrowed time. Now, I'm not in that camp at the moment, but that's a risk.
It is indeed. You mentioned interest rates are at a historic low. Is that going to stay that way, do you think, for a little while?
Yeah, well, certainly that's the message that's coming through the bond curve. So if I have a look at your 10-year interest rates sub 1%. So that's basically telling us interest rates are going to remain low for an incredibly long time.
It's free money.
Yeah, but I sit there and think about, what are we starting to witness at the moment? We're starting to witness the unwind of globalisation. Now, one of the great things about globalisation is it's delivered cheap goods. It's delivered choice. What has that done? It's kept inflation really low. If we start to unwind globalisation and produce local, as opposed to supply local, I don't think it's going to be as cheap. If we start to see more government involvement within economies around the globe, I don't think they're going to be as efficient. And we're starting to see this big pushback in regard to paying people more. Don't have a problem with that, but remember that adds costs.
There is an argument, of course, that we've been, the dictates of these, essentially, cheap fashion and all of these disposable things. It's probably not been great for supply chains, workers, various other things. But here's my final question. The government's announced a bold primary sector plan to boost the economic recovery. Achievable? Sustainable?
A for aspiration, D for detail. Glass half full. I've spoken to MPI actually this morning, and they say they're going to have more detail out on their website by latter part of next week. And we need that detail. My personal view is that the aspiration is light. If I go through the numbers, the numbers have exports going up, if we adopt the roadmap, by around 1.5% additional each year. But if you look at your primary sector exports are projected to shrink from about 16% of GDP to 14%. Now, I think we're going to need to be a lot more aspirational if the rural sector is going to be at the epicentre of New Zealand's economic revival. And I think it's going to actually need to be, because I don't think it's going to be manufacturing, and I sure as hell don't think it's going to be tourism. So we're going to need the rural sector to step up that value-added chain. So the aspiration to me, I like it. I think it's a little bit light in regard to what the number needs to be, and it's certainly light on detail, but touch wood, we're going to get the detail at the end of next week.
If you were suddenly standing on here and I was introducing you as Cameron Bagrie, Minister of Finance, and I said I want 3 key things that we can do in the future, the very near future, that we're either doing right or that we need to do to get back on track, what would they be?
Number 1 would be unlocking the power of water. Number 2 would be right-sizing the education sector, investing in the kids going forward. And number 3, and this is a pet one of mine, make financial literacy compulsory in schools.